Dr Brian Walker.
Thank you, Acting President. I would like to start my short contribution by first of all acknowledging that everyone in this chamber is here with the best of intentions to do the best they can for our state.
That's just not true.
And we all swore an oath before we came in. I'm going to read mine again.
Western Australia. Not yourselves.
And I'm going to read mine again. And we all stated in words similar with the different names, I, Brian Walker, swear by Almighty God that I will faithfully serve the people of Western Australia as a member of the Legislative Council. And that, surely, is the moral underpinning of everything that we do. We serve. So I find it also quite strange that when I'm talking to people outside the chamber, I'm saying, well, do you know, actually, truth matters nothing in politics. Absolutely nothing. The perception of truth is everything. And that is a true statement, because we can look at the worldwide events we've got just now, the recent election in the US, where truth has played no role whatsoever in any of the votes cast. But the perception of truth was mighty. And the perception of truth is created by words. Words matter. Words have meaning. We clothe the words with the meaning that we impart to what we are doing. Now, the explanatory memorandum, all 18 pages of a bill which is 18 pages long, to explain what changes are needed here. Now, I'm going to read one paragraph here, which is not the first part, but it does highlight one of the concerns I've got with the whole bill. It says, it is not appropriate for a registered political party to retain the right over use of these type of words and the use of these words in more than one political party's registered name or abbreviation is unlikely to lead to voter confusion or misidentification of a party. This is shocking grammar. Shocking grammar. And it's highlighted also by the word unlikely. It's unlikely to lead to voter confusion. The opposite meaning. Part of your explanatory memorandum is gibberish and states the opposite. Now, in a busy office, I understand things can go awry. If it can go awry with this, where else can it go awry? I'll lead you to the second paragraph. The bill strengthens the Electoral Act's existing requirements relating to the registration of political party names. Why? To reduce confusion amongst voters. I am of the view that there are entire departments in Parliament dedicated to confusing voters. I have, in my personal experience, people coming to me telling me that they're going to smoke tobacco because vaping tobacco is more dangerous. And that is a complete and utter lie. It's a falsehood. Why do they say that? They say that because they believe what they think they have heard from Parliament. Untruths have been created and spread throughout the community, causing harm. We even have this banning of voting. And I've tabled in this very place a paper, 1,400 pages of scientific research, which showed that properly used vaping is far, far safer than smoking. Far, far safer. And would save round about 200 West Australian lives every year were we to focus on vaping rather than tobacco. And this health minister promised to me on 2 occasions, and she promised the people of the state, that there would be no change for those who seek to use cannabis dried herb with a vape. There would be no change. She was so wrong. Either she was misinformed or she was misleading me, because the very opposite happened. It's impossible now to get adequate information about the options for vaping cannabis because the whole scheme has been banned, closed down, websites closed down, shops closed. So I have patients coming to me saying they'll smoke the cannabis because they believe it's safer than vaping. So when it comes to confusing voters, I think so far the government's done a pretty good job. But I would say the same thing to the other side as well. And what my learned colleague here was just saying about the other side of Parliament, again, I disagree with that. We should not be having sides. We have representatives of the government, an opposition whose focus is on enhancing the legislation that is before us, and a crossbench, which should ideally not be taking partisan politics, but suggesting the voice of the people, how we can enhance and serve the people of our state. This is who we should be. So you can imagine my surprise when this bill came through. Now, I listened with great interest to what my colleague, the Honourable Jorn Sibma, was saying when he actually eviscerated the logic of this bill with his more than excellent contribution to the second reading. Eviscerated. Funny you should mention that, because words do matter, and I understand that this bill has actually been created not by consulting. But having said that, there's a term, there's a form of grammar used in psychology. It's called the nominalizations, unspecified nominalizations. Things like understanding, things like recognition. Words which can't fit into a bucket. You can't carry it. It's wide. What happens is we impart meaning to these unspecified nominalizations. So what we have here is a bill to, it was said here, to strengthen the Electoral Act's existing requirements. It's fairly unspecified. But then you go on to say, in section 62J amended, 6B, subsection 6, does not apply to a word that is B, a collective noun for people. And you use the Macquarie definition of a collective noun. Now, in my office, we prefer to use the Oxford Dictionary of English. I don't know how many tomes that is, but it's certainly very extensive. But here it says the collective noun is a noun that under the singular form expresses a grouping of individual objects or persons. Okay? So Australian Christians, that would pass the first hurdle. Australian is an example under 60B(c), but they would presumably have squatting rights over the word Christian. But as a Christian, is it a collective noun for those adhering to the Christian faith? Except the Australian Christians, there's a legal challenge coming up here, is there not? Because, as I understand it, the Australian Christians espouse more the Protestant side of Christian faith. And that distinctly Protestant approach doesn't fit with others who might consider themselves Christians but in a different way. I'm not going to speak about the Christian nationalists in the US who have a very different understanding of the Sermon on the Mount, which leads into the question about what is socialism, which I think, if you were to look at the Sermon on the Mount, you'd understand that that's actually pretty socialist, or in the words of our brethren across in the US, woke. Something I find offensive. We'd take then, for example, the Christian democratic parties. I lived many years in Germany. That's the name of a very major party, especially the southern states of Germany, Christian Democratic Party. And they're probably liberal with a small L. Now, the big L is another name, isn't it? In Western Australia, under this proposal we currently have before us, such a party would be unable to use either Christian or Democrat. Given that the first is not a collective noun, this is a parallel universe the government is putting us in. And the second is a derivative of the word democratic, which has, and looking at Michael Collins, we understand here from the issues in Ireland at the beginnings of the 20th century and how they suffered for independence. So Michael Collins said that the word democratic has caused all this bother. What about then the Australian Democrats? Now, they are still registered at a federal level. Will they be able to register here? Okay. How can we actually... Are they not supposed to help us keep the bastards honest? I think the voters would be surprised. What about Socialist Alliance? Two collective nouns. Now, it's possible we could see that the WA Labour Party might have some issues with the word socialist. They certainly have problems with the word democratic. So I'd be interested to know, what we're looking at for here is actually an Orwellian paradigm, where words, the meanings of the words are being changed to mean something entirely different. I mean, I did refer to this government, bearing in mind this preponderance of one party in both chambers and the facility for putting through bills at a rate of knots without adequate time for proper examination, without referring, apart from one example, without referring to the Legislation Committee. So many examples of legislation which could have been improved had we just had the concept here of democracy or socialism or indeed consultation. Now we can go on to Victoria, the Companions and Pets Party, collective nouns. New Democrats, they probably wouldn't be able to operate here because we specifically seem to be excluding the concept of democracy in more ways than one in this legislation. And what about our brethren, the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party? That's 4 collective nouns, including party. Well, I could say that the Australian Labour Party, I approve of your name, actually. It's very classical in the Latin form, labore, or either that you've gone the American spelling. I prefer to think of the classical approach because I think the standards we have here are certainly higher than I would expect from our colleagues across the Pacific. Labore. But we have actually another party here which has got Labour with an OU. Latin, yes. Labore. Unlike lavare, which is for washing, and some people could do with that as well. But there we are. What about the parties we currently have here? I mean, the Liberals, who quite literally aren't. I hate to say it, brethren, but Labour doesn't. And the Nationals haven't been there a long time, have they? And with my greatest respect to my colleague, the Honourable Brad Pettit, the Greens, if we look at how they're behaving in Canberra, really ought to be renamed into the Reds.
Is there going to be a self-assessment?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that. Because there are only 2 parties in this chamber currently whose names actually align with their political intentions, Legalise Cannabis and Daylight Savings Party. Oh, dear. I will grant you that, but you must admit I'm having a lot of fun with the English language just now. Right. So the thing is that I have the greatest of respect for my colleague, and I would say my good friend, the Parliamentary Secretary, a man I immensely respect for his erudition and for his political skill. But it must be very embarrassing to have to stand up or sit in that table there and defend this bill or to put forward the tenets of this bill when quite clearly it doesn't take any real knowledge whatsoever to realise this actually is a bill, a self-serving bill. We've got here a political party which is struggling, which is going to go for the 3rd term, but is losing interest in the people. There is a resurgence of other political ideas. There is a difficulty in holding your own. We've got the federal government impinging upon our state election times. The uncertainties coming from that. We have got issues which are coming up. There's one recently just now regarding the issues with using your office staff to campaign, which found some concern with the CCC. Interesting, by the way, the CCC was looking at that because they seem very adept at not looking at things they should be looking at. So then we come back to the concept of democracy in our chamber here as well, and I'm finding that there's actually a lot of room for improvement. I did actually, at one uncareful moment, describe the current government as being an autocratic dictatorship. And while that's completely wrong, of course, the behaviour certainly seems to move in that direction. And this particular bill coming towards us, I think, is another example of how you could use the levers of power right now to advantage your own political case. I think we have to admit that. It certainly looks like that, it sounds like that, and I'm sure you'll explain to us why it's not like that, but who's going to believe you? I think the majority of our state will recognise it for what it is, a fudge. And I regret also that this bill comes from the Office of the Attorney General, who is a man, again, I immensely admire for his great skills and great courage in bringing forth bills which need to be brought. But in the last days and weeks of his term as a long-serving member of this Parliament, I look at this bill as being somewhat tawdry. And I think it takes some of the shine from his eminent career. And I regret this. I think you should regret this too. So what we ought to maybe do is, looking at the reasons for this bill, follow the money. I mean, the Democratic Labour Party, they have a total of $1,200 in donations from one individual. Full stop. They have never yet won a seat. I'm sure the research, I haven't done my research on how many percentage points have they got in the last votes. Not a great deal, I'd imagine. Does anyone have any interjection on the last results of elections? They're so, they're not even worthy of looking at. So how could people mistake that party for what is actually a great institution in our state, in our nation? How could we? And the point was made. I mean, there's plenty of other examples of very similar names coming up. In fact, this law is probably going to benefit our party more than anyone else, I would suggest. So I'm not fundamentally opposed to it. What I am opposed to is the lack of the moral underpinnings of a just law which serves the people of the state, as all of our legislation should do. But look at the Labour Party. Remember the $1,200 that they've got in total in donations for that party, and not a single member standing for Parliament yet. And then we've got the members of the Labour Party who will be happily taking the thousands of dollars from the AMEC, BGC, Clough, Chevron, Civmec, CME, Fortescue Metals, CBH Group, WA Hotels and Hospitality Association, and that might explain why the premiers, plural, have been very happy to stand there with a pint of beer in their hands, a very dangerous substance when compared to the cannabis, which they're busy actually refusing to look at. The Pilbara Metals, Satterley, Woodside. Who's actually employed at Woodside just now? The name escapes me. And so your Labour Party's donation list is a who's who of St George's Terrace. The immense power that you have, and then you wish to squash a minnow. It does you no credit. So I would say that what we should be doing is not dealing with this bill as an urgent bill coming through. There are more urgent things we should be dealing with. We should be serving our people with bills which actually help us into a better place, should we not? And I would wish you to stand proud, as you do, in the name of your party, confident that the people that respond to your call for votes, for support, for leading this country forward, that your pride in what you do does not need to be affected by minor parties of no standing, no credibility, no funds, and no voters. So this bill itself, while it will pass, we can't stop it, it does you no credit.